My name is Max Bergmann. I am the director of the Europe-Russia-Eurasia program here at CSIS, and it's my real honor and privilege to be moderating the fourth and final session, the role of other stakeholders in the South China Sea. I think we're going to have a wide-ranging discussion, but I'm going to turn it over to each of the panelists. Let me introduce them. First is Mateusz Chatys, is a research associate at the Center for Asian Affairs at the University of Lodz in Poland. He holds a PhD in political science and wrote his thesis on the patron-client concept in Chinese relations with Vietnam, Malaysia, and the Philippines. And his research interests include the United States-China competition in Southeast Asia, with a particular focus on the South China Sea dispute, especially from the perspective of the Philippines. Then we have Wongi Choe, head of the Center for ASEAN India Studies at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. His current policy-oriented research focuses on the role of Korea in the geopolitical dynamics and regional architecture in the Indo-Pacific. He received his BA and MA in International Relations from Seoul National University in Korea and a PhD in political science from the University of Washington here in the United States. And then to his right is Pooja Bhatt, associate professor at the Jindal School of International Affairs in India, and she's currently a visiting fellow here in Washington, D.C. at the Stimson Center. She's the South Asia visiting fellow. She's author of the book 9-Line, Deciphering the South China Sea Conundrum, which was published by Routledge Press in 2024. Pooja received her doctoral degree from the School of International Studies at Nehru University in New Delhi in 2021. She also holds a diploma in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Seas from the Korea Maritime Institute. Last but certainly not least is our Canadian friend, Jonathan Berkshire-Miller, co-founder and principal of Pendulum Geopolitical Advisory and is a senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute in Canada. He is an international affairs professional with expertise on security, defense, and geoeconomic issues in the Indo-Pacific, and is the co-founder and principal of Pendulum Geopolitical Advisory, a global consultancy under the Pendulum Group. In addition, as I mentioned, he's also at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, where he provides thought leadership on foreign policy and national security, and holds a BA in political science from Mount Allison University and a master's in international affairs from Carleton University. Okay, so let's turn to our panelists. Mateusz, why don't I hand it over to you to provide the European perspective on the South China Sea, both from a kind of Polish perspective as well as the perspective of the European Union and NATO when it comes to the South China Sea.
Thank you very much. First of all, many thanks to Mr. Gregory Poling for the opportunity to be here and to the whole team of CSIS for organizing this wonderful conference. As it comes to the role of the European Union in the South China Sea, it is worth emphasizing that as a trading bloc, the EU has many interests in the South China Sea, especially from the perspective of trade. Approximately 90% of EU's external trade is conducted by sea, and around 40% of maritime trade passes through the South China Sea. Yet the EU's interest in the South China Sea extend beyond trade. It reflects a broader commitment to upholding freedom of navigation and international law, defending multilateralism, and supporting a rules-based order. On many occasions, the EU has emphasized the importance of the UNCLOS as the legal framework governing maritime activities, and it has endorsed 2016 ruling by PCA. The EU stance is not only legalistic, it is strategic, aimed at defending the principle that might does not make right. And recent geopolitical developments have further highlighted the connection between security in Europe and the Indo-Pacific. While Europe currently faces the direct threat from Russia's aggression in Ukraine, we also see clear signs of strategic convergence between China, Russia, and North Korea. For starters, China has continued to export dual usage technologies to Russia, and it also supports Moscow in terms of diplomatic cooperation. Meanwhile, North Korea has provided arms, ammunition, and soldiers to support Russia's effort war effort in Ukraine. So these developments reflect an evolving group of countries seeking to reshape the international order, and their efforts are not limited to the European theater. Also in the maritime domain, the connection is equally evident. In the Baltic Sea, Europe has witnessed growing pressure from both China as well as Russia through so-called shadow fleet. And we could observe a number of incidents. For instance, last year, a Chinese flagship dragged its anchor, causing damages to gas pipeline and undersea cables. In the context of the South China Sea, it is worth emphasizing that it is not just a distant theater of contestation. It is a strategic fault line with direct implication for global security, including Europe's. The EU's role in the South China Sea rests on three strategic pillars: normative influence, capacity building, and limited but symbolic naval presence. The EU is not a military power in traditional sense, but it is a formidable normative actor. It has consistently championed international law, peaceful dispute resolution, and multilateral diplomacy. It is best emphasized when it comes to 2016 arbitral ruling. All 27 member states positively acknowledged this ruling, and 17 out of 27 actively support it. The EU also condemns coercive actions conducted by China in the South China Sea, including the militarization of artificial islands, as well as numerous examples of gray zone tactics operations, which are aimed especially towards the Philippines. The EU objected and raised its concerns in regard to the last year's incident near Second Thomas Shoal, as well as a recent incident near Sandy Cay this year. Also at the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, emphasized that Europe and Asia share common security challenges. Her remarks reflect the EU's growing recognition that maritime threats, information warfare, and military coercion in Asia resonate strongly with European security concerns. When it comes to capacity building, while the EU military footprint in Indo-Pacific remains limited, its engagement in capacity building and maritime cooperation has grown substantially. Key initiatives include enhancing security cooperation in and with Asia, as well as CRIMARIO II. The EU has established maritime security dialogues with both Vietnam as well as the Philippines, which are two of the most exposed Southeast Asian nations when it comes to the South China Sea dispute. In the Philippines, the EU has established a subcommittee on maritime cooperation, complemented by broader dialogue on maritime security, cyber threats, foreign interference, and disinformation. This is particularly relevant as the Philippines continue its transparency initiative, exposing China's disinformation and unlawful maritime actions. The EU support for countering information manipulation is both timely and necessary. Although the South China Sea has not yet been distinguished as a maritime area of interest under the EU's coordinated maritime presence concept, several European states have expanded their naval activities in the region. Of course, France, which has territorial interests in the Pacific, is the most active actor. This year, French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle and its strike group conducted joint exercises with the Philippines. And right now, British Navy deployed for the second time its aircraft carrier strike group. Even though UK is not a member of EU, it is still a European country, and it is worth emphasizing. Besides that, Germany, Netherlands, and Italy also demonstrated growing engagement through deployments of Navy as well as air forces to the region. While the EU does not have a unified maritime force in the region, these deployments showed that European powers are willing to signal solidarity and commitment despite the operational and political constraints. In the end, I would like to conclude with 3 forward-looking proposals to enhance EU's role in the South China Sea. For the first one is to designate South China Sea as maritime area of interest. It could lead to expand the CMP to include South China Sea and would provide a structured, non-provocative framework for naval deployments. The CMP is not confrontational, but offers a platform for coordination, joint exercises, port calls, and information sharing. The second one is building on bilateral defense agreements. The EU should build upon the bottom-up process that produced its 2021 Indo-Pacific strategy. Member states with strategic capabilities such as France, Germany, and Netherlands should pursue robust bilateral defense cooperation with Southeast Asian partners. France's ongoing negotiations with the Philippines for a visiting forces tie agreement and Germany's recent defense cooperation deal with Manila are timely and strategic, and these initiatives should be replicated and expanded by other member states. And finally, enhancing security assistance and deepening economic partnership. On the security front, the European Peace Facility should consider allocating resources to maritime domain awareness in countries like Philippines, providing surveillance systems, satellite data, maritime equipment, which would deliver tangible capabilities for local partners. At the same time, economic initiatives must follow suit. The Global Gateway, Europe's alternative to China's Belt and Road, has focused primarily on Africa, but it is time to increase the number of projects in Southeast Asia, focusing especially on digital infrastructure, clean energy, transport, and healthcare. On trade, the EU should fast-track its free trade negotiations with Philippines and Malaysia. While these deals have been concluded with Singapore and Vietnam, and negotiations with Indonesia are advancing, a more comprehensive trade footprint would offer regional states viable alternatives to economic overdependence on China. Finally, the European Union is not and does not aim to become a hard power player in the Pacific, but it is committed and capable actor, and one that brings diplomatic weight, economic resources, and legal legitimacy to the region. Unfortunately, Poland has limited capabilities when it comes to maritime threats, so I think that such countries like Poland, but also other countries like Lithuania and Czech Republic, those 2 small countries are the only European countries with Indo-Pacific strategies should engage more when it comes to military cooperation in other domains. It is worth emphasizing that observers from these 3 countries were joined the Philippines, the Balikatan maneuvers as observers from EU. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you for that great overview. Wongi, over to you.
Thank you, Max. Thank you. It's great to have opportunity to talk about ROK South Korea's perception and approach with regard to South China Sea issue. Well, before making my presentation, for a second, I just wondered, why am I speaking in this particular panel rather than the last one? I mean, the title of this panel is the role of outside partners, right? And the title of the last panel was the what was that, Allied network, right? So, I mean, our case part of the Allied network. So, yeah, this is just a joke. But I think that given what, in the past, what ROK has been dealing with, the South China Sea issue, I think this is partly understandable. Yeah, I mean, but I think for the last several years, in particular, for the last 3 years under Yoon administration, I would say that there has been a remarkable shift in ROK's approach toward South China Sea issue. So I'd like to focus on this kind of shift in Korean government's diplomatic and other aspects approach to South China Sea issue. Well, as far as the South China Sea issue is concerned, I think the kind of stakes and interest we have is no different than those of Japan. But if you look at the past responses and approaches of ROK, you have kind of radical, a big contrast in between South Korea's approach and Japan's approach. Yeah, this is a kind of the topic of another discussion, but anyhow, so I think that ROK has not been properly aligned its approach vis-a-vis South China Sea with the interest and stakes it has. But I mean, under the previous Yoon administration, this kind of passive approach vis-a-vis South China Sea changed. I think there are 4 areas that you can identify this kind of shift in ROK's approach. The first one is diplomatic engagement. Korean government's diplomatic engagement with regard to South China Sea issue was radically kind of shifted. The second one is the defense industry cooperation. You know that ROK has a very robust and internationally competitive defense industrial base. So in that regard, I think over the last several years, we made a big difference. The third one is maritime capacity building area. So not only the Navy to Navy cooperation, but also Coast Guard to Coast Guard cooperation, we did make some changes. And the fourth area of Korean approach is the joint exercise in Korea's ROK Navy's joint exercise with other regional partners. Well, the first one, the diplomatic engagement. I think starting 3 years ago, which is 2023, I think Korean government broke diplomatic silence with regard to the developments in South China Sea issue. In particular, August in 2023, when the PLA, the Coast Guard, kind of used the water cannon and things like that against the Filipino counterparts, Korean government, for the first time in recent years, issued a statement of concern with regard to this issue. And this is not just an isolated, just a one-off event. I mean, until May this year, ROK government issued 13 statements with regard, whenever you have clashes and kind of incidents of this PLA coercion occurred vis-a-vis the Filipino counterparts, South Korean government issued a statements of concern. Of course, I mean, the language of the statement is a little bit kind of not so strong, but it is very important that the Korean government decided to issue this kind of a statement in spite of China's persistent complaints and protests. For example, you have the several instances of when Korean government issued this statement, then the spokesperson of the foreign ministry of PRC government gave a very strong complaint about this. But Korean government kept issuing this kind of statements. So I personally think that this is kind of one aspect of new normal between in the bilateral relations with China. The second one is defense industry cooperation. Recently, the Hyundai heavy industry successfully delivered a BRP Miguel Malvar to the Philippines. This is a part of the first two pair, and the Hyundai heavy industry will deliver BRP Diero Selang to the Philippines Navy. I think this is a really desirable kind of the defense industry cooperation with Philippines in terms of the enhancing the capability of the claimant countries. And this is part of the broader the contract that Hyundai Heavy Industry has with the government of Philippines. So you have 2 frigates, you have 3 corvettes, and you have 6 OPVs. So these ships will be delivered to the Philippines Navy down the road. And also recently, the KAI, Korean, the air industry, had a successful contract with the Philippines government regarding the FA-50, the light combat aircraft. So this is one of the Korean the defense industry's kind of hit product, and it is reported that KAI will deliver 10. Actually, this is the second batch, 10 more FA-50s to the Philippines Air Force until 2030. So a lot of the kind of activities in defense industry cooperation. And also, one of the kind of strength of ROK is the capacity building support area, especially maritime capacity building. In this area, the Korean Coast Guard kind of potential and role is very important. Every year, you have about 10 decommissioned boats of various sizes, and some of which are successfully transferred after the repair and overhaul to claimant countries in Southeast Asia. So in that regard, I think you have a lot of potential, and also MDA cooperation and training. And my personal interaction with the Korean Coast Guard is that they are very willing to more with counterparts in the Philippines, Malaysia, and Vietnam. But the problem is in the governmental hierarchy of the Korean government, Korean Coast Guard is kind of belongs to the lower level agency. So in that regard, they don't have stronger voice. So in that regard, they have some political backup. So in that regard, the maritime capacity building kind of area is one of the successful areas that RK has been doing, and a huge potential down the road. And the last one is the joint exercise. I think the previous government under President Yoon gave a priority that RK Navy should expand its participation in the regional joint exercise, like Balikatan, Kadangman, Talisman, Save, and etc. But my observation is that Korea, the ROK Navy has some issue of scarcity in terms of naval assets and resources. And also their priority is just set on maintain the preparedness against any kind of provocations from North Korea. And these days we have growing pressure from China as well. I mean, if you look at what is happening recently between China and South Korea in the in the West Sea of Korean Peninsula, right? What China calls Yellow Sea. We recently discovered several the steel structures, 2 floating ones and 1 fixed ones. And these are kind of set up in the PMZ provisional measures zone, which is not kind of negotiated zone. So this puts kind of additional pressure for us. So in that regard, I think we have some increasing challenges, not only with regard to the regional kind of the security issues in the South China Sea area, but also in our kind of sea with PRC. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Pooja, please.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, CSIS, for inviting me for this conference. I'm always happy to speak to my South China Sea fraternity. Always happy to learn more from them. And thank you, Max, for actually calling it a stakeholder title and not an outside party, because I will speak as India as a stakeholder in the South China Sea, as a region and not an outside party. And it has particular reasons for this, and I'll just try and elaborate next few minutes. But first of all, I would deeply appreciate CSIS continuous advocacy and awareness and constant knowledge sharing about South China Sea, which has made it very much possible for scholars like us across the globe to to study closely the entire issue of South China Sea, keep tracking them, and has actually helped us developing my work. So thank you so much for that as well. Before I go to what India's own policy about South China Sea has been over these decades, I would want to first take a global picture out of it, zoom out, and try to talk about where India locates itself in that larger geopolitical scenario when it comes to South China Sea. So when India sees South China Sea, this is a region where American presence is receding during consecutive administrations. This has been a matter of concern because, of course, US administration has their diverging priorities at the moment, but this is also making the region more precarious with lesser American engagement in the region. At the same time, we are seeing several flashpoints developing at the same time within Asia, within Indo-Pacific. You have wars going on everywhere within Asia. Adding to that, there is continuous Chinese leadership determination of having Taiwan back into its mainland strategy. What all these are leading to is entire increasing scope and fertility of Chinese presence, Chinese belligerence in the region. And seeing from that perspective, India has three interests in South China Sea. First is definitely economic, because while the last dated available figure, governmental figure, is about 55% of Indian trade passes through South China Sea, but that was 2015, and since then we haven't updated those data for various reasons in South China Sea. By any day, by volume, it is 80%, and by value, 90% of our trade passes through South China Sea, which is a big amount for India's own economy, given the fact India is now the fourth largest economy in the world. Second is of security, definitely, because the trade security is on one hand very important for India, but at the same time, anything that happens to South China Sea, because it is our secondary area of interest, primary being Indian Ocean region, anything that happens in South China Sea has to have a fallout for Indian Ocean region as well. So that again remains a security. And third, largely, is normative, because India does believe in rules-based order based on UNCLOS and freedom of navigation, and these norms actually bind India to be committed to this entire region. And at the same time, at the regional level, we are seeing that what is happening is that economic security has come to be a foundation of national security and global security engagement of various countries. And that determines how they are, engaging with South China Sea littorals at the moment. Within that entire idea, the global commons picture remains large in their minds, that how these countries see South China Sea as global commons. So in this regard, I have not so comfortable 2-3 suggestions that first of all, what the regional countries have to do to facilitate the stakeholders' involvement in the region, and then allocate India's position in it. So to start with, as we all know, COC, the Code of Conduct on South China Sea, has been progressing for over the years, and main parties are between ASEAN countries and China, so there are very, very little engagement from India and other stakeholder countries, including US. So even though we have our interest in everything Southeast Asia, South China Sea, there's very little engagement, the scope of engagement that has been provided to us. So first kind of suggestion for the ASEAN countries would be to try and maybe broaden this scope of engagement when they talk about our COC, which allows the stakeholder countries, extra-regional countries who have actually genuine interest in the region for the stability and the security of the region to be a part of those engagements. I don't know how easy it would be, but I think that is something to start thinking about. Second is, second reason is more realpolitik, that while most countries are primarily looking for their own territorial sovereignty, national integrity, they cannot work in isolation. So one way of pushing back to China and support South China Sea littorals when it comes to their own maritime rights and claims in the region is to constantly raise diplomatic statements at every time these incidents happen. I know these are not easy to do again, but again, if the international community kind of shows either bilateral level commitment or multilateral level commitment in showing these diplomatic statements, that might be a helpful start again. And at the same time, remain engaged in capacity building of these South China Sea countries. This is what regional countries can do. But at the same time, if I look at India's own position in past 1 decade since this South China Sea PCA verdict has come, India's position has also evolved. For initially few years, definitely India did not see South China Sea as something of its immediate importance. But after that, in 2020, all of a sudden, when we saw there was increased belligerence by China in the South China Sea region, India did come out with a full half a pager statement on one of the newspapers where the ministry said that India sees South China Sea as global commons. And I think that was the very first start. So in terms of political shift, we can still see that our governments are still coming to its terms and how to shape its South China Sea policy. But if you see the military engagement and diplomatic engagements, we have come a far way. India has started doing a lot of diplomatic military exercises with Philippines and other regional countries of the region. We also have increased our military sales to a lot of Southeast Asian countries. BrahMos missiles to Philippines is one case in spot. Beyond that, if we see, we have also increased multilateral exercises with ASEAN countries. Last year, India had IME, ASEAN-India Maritime Exercise in South China Sea, in some part of South China Sea. And anyone who understands military exercises of this kind would also understand there has to be a political willingness behind it. So it's not without political willingness that we are seeing these exercising happening. So overall, but all of this actually lies in the entire bandwidth of capacities. India has limited capacity at the moment. As we are developing economically, we're also trying to develop our resources and try to help out the countries in the region. And it is just a matter of time that India will reach a point where it can pose itself as the reliable partner that the US and other regional countries are trying to seek from India. So in this regard, I will say that we will just have to wait out for the time and have this confidence that India does have a South China Sea policy. Maybe we have not spelled it out in words, but there is something happening in action, and it's just a matter of capabilities that in coming years, that how we are trying to act in South China Sea. I think with that, I will wrap it up, and I'll be happy to take any questions on this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Let me hand it off to Jonathan for the last round of our introductory comments.
Well, thanks so much, and it's a pleasure to be back here. Thank you to CSIS, thank you to Greg. I had a 2-year gap, like a few others, in between the conferences. So a couple of things have happened in our great partnership between Canada and the United States, but thankfully I've not been tasked with answering those questions, and instead I'm here on the South China Sea. And I'm also cognizant that I am the last speaker, and while it's dangerous to get between you and lunch, I'm now between you and happy hour. So I will try to be very quick with a few comments, and then we can get to questions. So 3 very quick points for Canada. As was kindly mentioned by John in an earlier panel, Canada does have an Indo-Pacific strategy. We're now 3 years into that strategy. It was originally released in 2022. So the first point that I'll reference is intentions. So the intentions and the actions that a state like Canada, and while we may quibble over language, I didn't even think about the fact that we weren't in the allied panel, so we are in the outside party panel. And when it comes to intentions and some of the actions we've taken, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. So let me get to that point first. The second point I'll talk about is actual capabilities. So you have your intentions, what you're trying to put forward in the region, and then there's the actual capabilities in military terms, in diplomatic terms, and in development terms. And then the third one, I think we're all aware of this, I feel like our head's on a pivot every day, is the distraction factor. So you may have best intentions, you may even have those capabilities to put the intentions forward, but then something hits you on a random Tuesday and all of a sudden you're no longer focused on what you're focused on. So this has been something that's plagued a lot of quote-unquote Asia hands for a long time. As something comes up in some other part of the world and all of a sudden our attentions and also our money is moved in different places. So the first thing on intentions, so Canada in our strategy, obviously the intention was to say that the Indo-Pacific is the most consequential part of the world. On the South China Sea, we've been a longtime proponent, supportive of UNCLOS. We were an early supporter of the arbitral ruling in 2016, and we consistently make sure that we put our support forward to our Filipino friends and to others of the importance of that. We also, from an actions perspective, have been, even though you can be forgiven for not thinking about the Royal Canadian Navy and our 4 submarines that sometimes can't sail on the ocean, but we do have an active Navy that tries, it's very professional, and has been deployed more in the region over the past few years. So housed within our strategy has been a commitment to send more frigates to the region, to have more deployments of our submarines to the region. And when I do get to the capabilities section of my talk, if, the devil's in the details, but if we do see some new capabilities come online, which it seems like they could be from the Canadian side, this could actually have an appreciable impact from a defense and security perspective on our engagement in the South China Sea and with partners in the Indo-Pacific. The sort of the glass half empty side of this intentions and capabilities, the first thing, and this was some of the advice I was giving to the Canadian colleagues in the lead up to G7, which was just this weekend, was that we need to be, number one, very intentional and very honest with our language. So some of the things that I've heard so far in this panel, and I hear this all the time when talking about Taiwan, when talking about South China Sea, when talking about East China Sea, is about maintaining the status quo. And one of the pieces of advice that I gave to, not just to my government, but to other G7 parties is that, look, we are dealing with a playbook that is, we are well past that playbook. What status quo are you trying to maintain? It's being changed every day, it's being changed every hour, being changed every minute. I think we've heard this through all of the panels, whether it's through gray zone coercion, whether it's in the ecological sphere, whether it's in the traditional security sphere, that I think we need to be a lot more intentional in our language first. And of course, our actions need to follow that too. But what I've been really sort of lobbying for, especially from a G7 perspective, and I'm happy that we have seen some progress on the maritime security lens from the G7, is actually talking about the constant erosion of the status quo. So no longer the sort of the lethargy of the language of saying, let's stop you in your tracks and let's, we don't want to change the status quo. Well, let's wake up. The status quo is changing every day. We need to recognize that change and actually put that in our language a lot more carefully. So that sort of goes to my second point, which is capabilities. And again, Canada is not going to be one, especially from a defense perspective, that is going to change the game by any means. But to give you an example and one data point on the submarine issue. So as I was sort of being a little bit polemic about our 4 submarines, and when you take the maintenance of the submarines in dry dock, sometimes you have 1 or none. We're putting a bid in for 8 to 12 submarines. So that could be a tripling of our submarine fleet. We do obviously have challenges in the Arctic, challenges in the Atlantic as well, but that could have an appreciable impact about our engagement with partners in Southeast Asia. The second thing is we see this not just as a pure hard capabilities perspective, but we see this from a diplomatic side as well. So we've worked hard to actually try to staff all of our missions in ASEAN. So we realize that it's not just about bringing the not so large Canadian Navy to the region, but it's also about having our diplomats having ears on the ground, having discussions on the ground. And I think that you'll see the final, we now have an embassy office, I believe, in Laos, but I think that we'll be upgrading that to a full embassy. So having full embassies throughout the ASEAN region will be another sort of aspirational goal that will help us. The sort of last piece here, and the jury's still out because we have a new sort of government, even though it's the same party, it's the Liberal Party, but as we've heard from many partners in the region that the values side of the way that we engaged with them was not as effective as some of the capabilities that we were bringing to bear in the South China Sea. So dark vessel detection that we're doing in the Philippines, for example, very helpful, very well regarded. Capacity building in the Coast Guard, very well regarded. Sometimes preaching on values, not so well regarded. So, and Canadians, we can be very bad about that. Sometimes we can be a little bit patronizing. But I think we've recognized that. We've heard some of our partners tell us that. So I think that you might see that side sort of meld itself out a little bit. And my sort of final point here will be on the distraction side. And again, I do hope this first strategy that we've put out is a 3-year strategy. It's not funded with a lot of money, but the fact that it has any money in today's fiscal climate is worth noting. So it's $2.3 billion. That runs out in 2027 for us. We're in the context right now of, as I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, of a challenged relationship with the United States, continental security, Arctic security being first and foremost for us right now. Of course, we're seeing a bit of a vacuum right now of support for Ukraine. And as you may or may not know, Canada has a large diaspora of Ukrainians. So basically, on the distraction side, and I hate to frame it that way because there are very, very important reasons why we should be bolstering NATO, why we should be doing more in the Arctic. Caveat and couch your optimism of Canada doing more in the Indo-Pacific because we do have other theaters to engage in. So with that being said, I will stop. I do see people wanting to head out for their happy hour soon, so and look forward to questions.
Not yet. We still have 20 minutes, and I'm going to try to do a lightning round. If those people have questions, think of them. I'm going to maybe ask each panelist a separate question. Mateusz, let me ask you, Europe is undergoing a massive increase in defense spending. Actually, there's a lot of Polish-Korean cooperation when it comes to defense industrial cooperation. You go to Estonia, you see Korean howitzers, and in Poland similarly. But as Europe builds up militarily, invests in their defense sector, they're also going to be looking for exports. Do you see defense industrial cooperation, arms sales, security cooperation as sort of kind of an area where Europe may grow into in the South China Sea?
Actually, I think that there is a room for that cooperation. As far as I know, Philippines are going to modernize their navy by buying new submarines, and according to the latest reports, the Philippines government is wondering about buying such submarines produced by joint venture by French and German companies. So I think that there is a space to develop such cooperation. Also, France is exporting a lot of its jet fighters to Southeast Asian countries, for instance, to Indonesia. and they also produce some naval vessels for Southeast Asian countries. So I think that investing more in modernizing of armies in Europe will facilitate closer cooperation between Europe and Southeast Asia, and this is another way of expanding its footprint in the Southeast Asia region, and especially when it comes to the South China Sea dispute. But it depends to what extent different countries will increase their budget funds, because as you probably know, Poland was recently mentioned by Secretary Hetzev as a model partner alongside Israel. So we are spending almost 5% of our GDP for modernizing of our military, but we are focusing on the threats in land domain and air domain. Basically, we do not plan to invest a lot in Navy, so there is a room for improvement even in this domain. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I think you also mentioned the European Peace Facility, which for those that don't speak European Union speak, that's basically the EU Security Assistance Facility, which is mainly all going to Ukraine, but it has a global potential and could go to the South China Sea as well.
Yeah, basically Ukraine is the biggest beneficiary when it comes to this program. Also some Eastern European countries and African countries. But yes, I think that EU should take a look on Japan and their OSA program and try to support more Southeast Asian countries, especially those that want to stand up to China, like the Philippines. So they can invest bit by bit, but in domains which are important from the perspective of those countries.
Great. Wongi, I want to ask you, you point to a shift that happened in Korea's approach toward the South China Sea roughly, I think it was 3 years ago or a couple of years ago. What prompted that? What was the trigger? Was it concern about China? Was it viewing the region as increasingly economically important? Maybe you could elaborate on that a little bit. And then also, now that there is a new government in Korea, do you think that trend will continue?
Well, you know that the shift happened when we had a shift in government. So in 2022, right, we had a right president from the conservative political bloc. Unfortunately, we do have some political polarization. So depending on which side you are straight across the aisle, right? So you have very different notion of the desirable foreign policy. But so there was certainly a partisan difference. But I think if you look at the changes in the strategic environment, right? So we had growing pressure from what is happening, not only in South China Sea, but the northeast area as well. So I think there was some sort of strategic reckoning or awakening. So that the idea that we should not anymore keep punching under the belt. We need to step up and play some relevant role that is commensurate with our strategic weight, economic weight in the region, right? So we identify ourselves not anymore one of those developing countries. So we are one of the responsible stakeholder in the region. So this sense of the strategic kind of perception is really big. And in that regard, even if we have the new president, President Lee, who is coming from the progressive political bloc, I think at least, some of the team members in his foreign policy team, for example, the new NSA, the National Security Advisor, Mr. Wee, and a lot of people are kind of on the common ground with this sort of shift in the strategic environment. So we have greater sense of kind of crisis, and also we also have a greater sense of heightened national confidence, right? So with the kind of capability and ability, I mean, the defense industrial base and the K-pop, all those things, right? So I think we feel that we can do more. But I mean, whatever, the issue, the challenge is, the top priority still is North Korean kind of threat. Yeah. Okay.
And Pooja, to you, it seems that the Korean and Indian strategic thinking is actually, in some ways, feels pretty similar toward the South China Sea, and that India wanting to be more engaged, becoming more engaged. Do you see this as sort of a permanent trend? Maybe you could talk a little bit more about what are the key drivers? Is this China? Is this economic relations or economic opportunity?
You kind of answer my question itself. So basically, yes, it's going to be a permanent. It seems like that bipartisan in our country, it has been recognized that economic development, is primary factor for us to be involved in anything maritime at the moment. Second is the China factor. We are also a victim of, Chinese aggression in our northern borders, where we've just recently had, skirmishes in the past few years. So, and also then the normative angle about the, South China Sea has gotten stronger over the years. More of academia, strategic community started to talk about why South China Sea and the maritime domain is important for us. So I think it's not just one party or one leader thought about, Indo-Pacific or maritime. I think it's going to sustain for the upcoming, administrations in India as well.
And Jonathan, over to you. You talk about sort of the normative element and how Canada can be fairly preachy towards other countries. The United States doesn't know anything about acting that way. But it strikes me that also that might be an area where coordinating with the Europeans in kind of a shared approach toward the South China Sea, and there's increasing effort in Canada to coordinate more and work more with the European Union. Do you think when it comes to Canadian-European cooperation, is that something that is being talked about in Canada as applying to other regions, other issues in the world, and could perhaps be relevant? Where we talk about how this panel is not the allied panel. I don't know. To me, you're all allies. And any complaints about this, I will just leave it to Greg. Any compliments about this panel, I'm happy to take them. But I'm curious how you see the kind of normative dimension, because it does strike me as still important, as that's a key part of how democracies, especially Canada, European Union, Korea, India, would want to engage the region as one of the kind of broader appeals. And this hits at a major thread and challenge of consistently throughout American foreign policy. But I'm curious how you see it.
Yeah, it's a great point, and I'm happy that I'm still considered an ally. We're always allies unless it's a hockey game, so that's what I always say. But I think it's actually a really interesting point. So, I find that I'm in Europe more than I'm in Asia recently. And most of those discussions when we're in Europe is actually talking about the Indo-Pacific and then vice versa. Part of that is premised on what's happening obviously in Ukraine, but part of that is, I think our Korean friend talked about a strategic awakening on China and some of the things that are happening. We've had that awakening in Canada. I think our European friends have had that as well. So absolutely, I think there's more space, there's more discussion happening, both in the public realm, in the sort of behind closed door realm at the track 1 level, at the sort of mixed realm and the sort of track 1.5 level. So I do think there is that discussion more broadly on China and the challenge that China poses. I think more specifically there is discussion on the maritime security elements, including the South China Sea. The one sort of caveat and sort of challenge I would point here, and so I sit with the ARF as an ARF EEP, one of the sort of track 2 groups in the ASEAN Regional Forum context. One of the challenges there is if we bandy too close with Europe, that we seem like we're kind of Canada and Europe coming in and saying, okay, this is our thoughts on the South China Sea. So there's some value in that, but I do think it's very important for us actually to be doing things, if we're going to do it trilaterally, to be looking at countries like Korea as well, and Japan as some gateway countries to have those discussions. It doesn't mean that we can't be having those conversations with our European friends and potentially involving them in those mini-laterals or different forms of geometry, but I am a little cautious of us doing too many projects that would be, for example, Canada, Brussels, and doing that in ASEAN. I think the perception gap sometimes can be a bit challenging. And just a final sort of point on this too, I think the last panel talked about the different sort of diverging perspectives. One of them is a shared theater perspective, or the idea that the territorial disputes are connected. We also have this debate right now happening in the strategic community in Canada, where one side, which I would frame more as like the ASEAnists, those who say like, look, if we're gonna talk about the South China Sea or Southeast Asia issues, just keep it in Southeast Asia, talk about it at the ASEAN Regional Forum or ASEAN-related fora. There's another one that says, look, there's a natural interconnection here between Taiwan, South China Sea, East China Sea. It's a broader issue about China. So we're having that debate as well, and it's not entirely resolved on our side either.
Great, we have a few minutes left, so any questions? Yes, we'll take you and you and you. And please make them brief, because I think people...
Hi, so my question is for Pooja Bhatt. And in your book, 9-Line, you advocate for India's legal normative engagement in the South China Sea. So my question is, what are the limits of legal activism in deterring maritime coercion, and how can India operationalize its normative regional leadership? Thank you.
Great question. Maybe we'll go here, and then we'll go there.
My question is for Wongi. So you talk about Korea's shift. Do you see under this president a desire to take part in the various minilaterals happening in the region, such as the Quad Squad or August Pillar 2?
Great. And if you wait for the microphone, it's coming.
Hi, quick question for Wongi about, again, the shift with Yoon. How much, if any, pressure or persuasion was there from the Korean U.S.-Japan trilaterals and in further engagement with the U.S.? And then also for Pooja about the Indian-Chinese border dispute. You mentioned, Jonathan, about the linking territorial and maritime disputes. How much of that border dispute, if anything, is connected, and India's position on China and its own rivalry influences its position on the South China Sea? Thank you.
Great. Well, so two questions to Pooja and to Wongi. Pooja, if you start.
Thank you for the questions. In my defense, the book I wrote was published first time in 2020 and republished in 2024. So yeah, it's a bit dated, and it should have been by now 10-line, I guess, not 9-line. But in terms of legal activism, what I wanted to say that India has to start making more statements about how it complies with UNCLOS and how it stands with UNCLOS. And I think since then, we have seen various statements coming out, both at the bilateral level, whenever Indian Foreign Minister, Defense Minister visits Philippines and other regional countries, there has to be a para on UNCLOS and how India complies and supports, Philippines and other countries on their South China Sea stance. I think that has come into picture now very often. So that would be my answer to that. And of course, India's own rivalry with China on the territorial borders has definitely influenced our position on the maritime border, because we know if you need to protect ourselves, we have to protect ourselves at two borders. So there is a growing thinking that we are just not contained by China on the northern borders, but on the maritime borders, that they're very much interrelated now.
Thank you. With regard to the second question from Krista, I don't think it's just a matter of pressure or persuasion. So it is a kind of the policy-making decision on the part of, on the recognition of our own strategic interest and position. But, the question whether the new government in Seoul under President Lee will continue this kind of approach and stance on South China Sea, it remains to be seen. I can't tell for sure. I hope President Lee continues to this kind of stance, but one of the priority that President Lee emphasized is to restore the deteriorated bilateral relations with China. And the Yoon government's stance and statement on Taiwan Strait issue and South China Sea issue, what China pinpointed, singled out as source of conflict. So, I mean, it has been consistent Chinese message to South Korea that Yoon government's very aggressive stance on South China Sea as well as Taiwan Strait is indication of the anti-China kind of policy stance. So this kind of the complaints and even pressure, right, from China. I mean, so you don't know how President Lee and his foreign policy team will kind of digest this kind of thing. So to the extent you buy the Chinese narrative that South Korea is not direct party to the disputes, third party, this is a matter of China and clement countries, you should stay aside. Then if you abide by the principle of mutual respect, things like that, then you might observe some sort of changes. I don't know, but yeah, I hope not. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. We ended exactly on time, so I want to thank our panelists for ending promptly. Please join me in thanking our great panelists for a great conversation.
I think we have on your agenda 5 minutes of closing remarks. I have no intention of doing that. As Jonathan already said, I'm standing between you and happy hour. I just want to say thank you again for coming. It's a real honor that we've been able to do this for 15 years. We expect to do it on year 16. I'd like to thank all the speakers again and the CSIS staff, streaming and broadcasting, security and conferencing, but especially the Southeast Asian ANTI teams that have been doing all the hard work in the room. Give them a big round of applause. You all saw Andreka and Harrison throughout the day. They're responsible for anything that went wrong, including the naming of the panels. Lauren Mai, Monica Sato, Jaffa Keatsone did a lot of the hard work today. And our current crop of interns, Rosiozia and Pone, who I think has been stuck at the registration desk all day, so doesn't know that I thanked him. But again, thank you all so much, and we'll see you next year.